Mhm.
It's funny that you say four things. I mean, that's a lot, still getting four things. Like when I started collegiate running, I remember our coach said, she said, schoolwork, running, friends, you can only choose two. And we had to decide, like, oh, is running one of our things, right?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, we're constantly navigating the order these things go in.
Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers, we have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. My guest today on Podcast for Inquiry is Sabrina Little. Sabrina is a philosopher and ultra runner. Her areas of research are virtue theory, character education, and moral psychology. She is a 5-time U.S. national champion in trail and ultra running, a former American record holder, and World Silver Medalist. Sabrina is the author of The Examined Run: Why Good People Make Better Runners. In today's episode, Sabrina answers the question, why do good people make better runners? What are the performance-enhancing virtues, and do they outweigh the performing-enhancing vices? We talk about the difference in taking a short versus long-term perspective, what being competitive means, the importance and challenge of balancing the multiple areas of life that need your time and attention, and how the same behaviors can be described in very different ways. I am delighted to have an episode of Podcast for Inquiry devoted to the intersection of two things that loom large in my life, running and ethics. Here is my conversation with Sabrina Little. Sabrina Little, thank you for talking with me today on Podcast for Inquiry.
Thanks so much for having me.
I want to talk to you about your book, The Examined Run, because it's a wonderful blend of two things that I am passionate about. One is running, and the second is being a good person, philosophy. And I spent a lot of time on both. I think my first question is I want you to defend the subtitle of your book, Why Good People Make Better Runners. It's certainly provocative, and but it's, to me, non-obvious because I can see how being a good person can help. So it's not that I think it's necessarily wrong. But before I read your book, I also thought, no, I can think of jerks that I know who nonetheless are excellent runners, and I can think of certain qualities of not very good, not very nice, and not very moral people who nonetheless may have exceptional athletic prowess. So I didn't see the connection was not obvious before reading your book. Anyone that hears the title and the subtitle might not see it. So let's start with that. Why do good people make better runners?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's meant to be provocative, right? It's provocative to me too when I hear it because I think of all of the terrible, instances of bad character and cheating and other vices, and not just in distance running, but in all sports, right? Um, so the reason for that subtitle, so in the book, I'm talking about a number of virtues that you can develop in the context of distance running. Like, how do you use distance running as a laboratory to develop things like perseverance or patience, or even just kind of like an equanimity with respect to your emotions, right? All of these sorts of things. And these are good making features of a life, right? They help you to flourish. And I look at a number of vices too, right? So I have a chapter called performance enhancing vices, right? So being deceptive, for example, or being intransigent, like willing to hold on even at cost to your body. Well, there are short term benefits in something like that, right? So we know there are vices in sport. And in all of those cases, when I talk about these vices, I talk about alternative like virtues you could sub in their place that would have similar performance benefit. And so you could live a very selfish life with respect to the sport, right? Like you could build your life around yourself and around your hobby and have kind of an outsensed, an outsized sense of its value. Or you could do what a lot of runners are doing today, which is kind of like lean into the community aspect of running and make it charitable and celebrate the goods of other people around you and their performances because you can't always run, right? And there are benefits that come to that. And so looking at the major point that I wanted to make in the book is like our participation in sport is not morally neutral, right? We're either acting in terms of certain virtues and kind of like reinforcing them in a way that could impact our life outside of sport, or acting in terms of certain vices, right? And if there are trade-offs that you could make, like instead of being envious, why don't you just lean into emulation and what follows from that? Are there performance benefits following from that? So yes, it's meant to be provocative, and also I think you can be a really high level performer in distance running specifically without costs to character.
Right, and it's I think there's a lot of things you just touched on there, and I want to drill down on a lot of them. But one of them is the perspective between the short term, the long term. Like you can do something at a short term benefit that comes at a long term cost, and you write about this at one point. You had a phrase in your book that as soon as I read it, it resonated very, very strongly within me. And it was death before DNF. And I was like, oh gosh, that's me. Like I had to admit that. And for those that don't know, DNF is an acronym for did not finish. And like whatever it takes to get over I'm going to get over that finish line. And then if I keel over immediately after and dive, that's fine because I made it across the finish line. And I know that that's not a healthy attitude. That's not the one that I should be having. And I read that. I was like, oh no, she knows me. She's never met me. And I'm not like that all the time, but if it's something that I've decided is important and it's something that I want to absolutely have that aspect. So can you talk a little bit about how to like I'm sure you're a very competitive runner. You must have that at least in some part, and how you balance that, and advice for others who won't back down on a goal that they've set for themselves, even if they really shouldn't.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I wish there were some line there where you could say, when you cross this, you are being recalcitrant and you are, intransigent and you should really stop. But there's no decisive line, right? Like line in the sand. And so it's something that you continually have to negotiate. Like, where is the limit, the moral limit in my participation in sport and that I shouldn't cross, right? So death before DNF, right? You would rather die than not finish a race. I mean, I think that's something that characterizes runners, but it's not just runners, right? Like I just read the book Into Thin Air about the climbers in Mount Everest. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the reason why they're good climbers is that they push past, like they override lines where other people would just turn, right? And they've been able to summit more things. But at some point, there's a line you shouldn't cross because then you're compromising other goods in your life. And maybe the line that you shouldn't cross, right? So maybe you're forcing yourself to finish something. Maybe it's a bodily limit, right? So maybe you would get injured if you keep pushing past, right? Maybe it is like a communal limit, right? So you are investing too much time into your running such that you are trespassing over other goods in your life, right? Like you are not spending enough time with children or friends, or you are shirking your responsibilities as a citizen to be all in on this craft of running. And maybe it's a moral limit, right? So, I mean, as we're recording last week, the marathon world record holder for women, Ruth Chetnigetich, tested positive for a banned substance. And there's like a question of what are you willing to do? What kinds of lines are you willing to cross in order to maximize your performance? And I think we don't do a good job kind of articulating that there are certain things we shouldn't pass, right? We want to talk about ourselves as limitless or capable of whatever we put our minds to.
Hmm.
And that's not a great way of conceiving of how running fits into a good life. Like,
And we
should you
really,
finish a run and have a broken body at the end of it or broken relationships? Well, no, you should be asking questions about that.
and as a society, we also really celebrate like the number one, like the record holder, the person that crossed the finish line first, uh, and then we elevate that person to such an extent that then we look at all the other characteristics and they tend to get a benefit almost as a halo effect. So even if they're not a good person, even if they are neglectful of their children or of their partners, or they do things that from anybody else they would be castigated for, but because they're the world champion, they are the fastest runner, the strongest weightlifter, the wealthiest person in the world. They've got the most money, more than anyone else. We we really celebrate the people at the very pinnacle of any kind of achievement, and we say, well, if it takes being, a philanderer or someone who ignores their kids and lets other people raise them, or mean to other folks, maybe it's okay if, or at least the behavior is justified because of the accomplishment. And so I was wondering if you could comment on that and how we might, like if you agree that we are that way, and comment on whether we should be that way, and if we shouldn't be that way, how we might change that type of, I guess, accomplishment worship. If that's not if I can invent a term.
Yeah, yeah, no, I do think that's right. Yeah, I think that's well said. I think we kind of lack an imagination for what the good stories are in sport, right? So being the best, right? That's obviously one story, and it's
Mhm.
interesting, and it's clarifying of our limits, like it's clarifying of what we're capable of. Like those are important stories to tell, but there are also stories of people living with integrity within their limits, or like parents who are also who love their children and also are trying to compete well within the time constraints that they have, or people who are investing in their communities in really rich ways, or just occupying the sport in ways that are interesting and like admirable beyond just performing at a really high level. So yeah, I certainly think that's the case. The phenomenon that you're talking about when you say like, oh, we permit them to be terrible because they are succeeding. Yeah, it's called norm differentiation, right? We have different moral standards, or we think that the same moral standards don't apply to people who are exceptional. And it's funny,
Mhm.
like this is true in sport, right? So the Olympian who is, like has a raging temper or something like that. I think we do that in sport, but we also do it just in leadership in general, right? If you look at
Mhm.
like industry leaders, if you look at the people we select as to govern us, right? Like often it's like, well, they stimulate the economy and therefore, you'll make any number of excuses for their actions, but character does matter, right? We kind of
Mhm.
explain it away when we get the outcome that we want.
Yeah, I remember on my very first race, I didn't do my first run until I was nearly 30 years old. I was a geek. I preferred the company of books to people throughout a good part of my childhood and into my early teen years. And I was the last person chosen on the schoolyard for any team sport. I was nearly 30 when for the first time I ever did a run, and I was doing the Terry Fox run in Albania, and I was in my late 20s, and there was this teenage Albanian guy, and we kept passing each other for the first 2 or 3 kilometers, right? Like our natural paces were. Um, were very close to each other, and then we were going on this really big field, and we had to go. We were supposed to go like basically around the field, the circumference of this square field, and about 2/3 to 3/4 of the runners were going across the diagonal. And at this particular point, this guy was he was ahead of me, and he looks back and he points towards doing the full road. Like he's pointing, he's asking me. We're both doing the full course. Neither of us are going to cut corners. And I nodded him, but then when I did that, my eyes narrowed. Like there's no way I'm going to let you win. And you mentioned this in your book. I think it was right in your introduction. You say that cutting corners on a cross country course is wrong, and so what makes it wrong? And is it wrong just because you say so? And then we're into meta ethics. And now I can assure you, when I was on that course, I was not thinking of meta ethics, but both of us just instinctively knew we were definitely competing with each other. I never knew his name. I didn't actually see him again. But we also wanted to make sure that our competition was fair and that we were both going to follow the actual course. So, what was instinctive for me and this Albanian teenager, who regrettably, whose name I didn't know, and this was over 20 years ago, we instinctively understood what you called meta ethics. So, can you tell us a little bit more explicitly what he and I had intuited on that first race course that I ever participated in?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. So, right. So metaethics is just the source of normativity, or like why something is bad, right? Can you provide an account of it? And so is it like something is inherently wrong, right? Like by nature, right? Is there something to being a human that is like it's harmful to humans to cheat or to lie or something like that, right? Is it something that is just an emotional response, like yuck, I don't like cheating, right? That's called emotivism. There's prescriptivism. That's like you say something's bad and it just means I don't want you to do that thing. There's social contract where we've all decided together that this thing is wrong and we're not going to violate it, right? So there are all these different kinds of positions. My point in talking about cheating on a cross country course is just to show people that maybe you're not thinking in like explicitly thinking that you're an ethics person or whatever, you're already doing ethics, right? Like you are already asking for accountability for like why these things are wrong, right? And so in the case of like a cross country course, yeah, like it is a kind of social contract. Right? We've decided that these are the rules, and those rules determine the game, right? Like if you are playing by a different set of rules, like you start cutting courses or you strap on a pair of rollerblades or something, you cease to participate in the same kind of game. And so for it to derive any kind of like meaning or pleasure in participating in a sport, you have to play by whatever the set of rules are.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in the game of chess, the goal is to capture the king. But if you just reach over, pick up your opponent's king, and run out of the room, I mean, in a literal sense, you have captured your opponent's king, but nobody would say that you have won the game because you've
Yes.
not followed the admittedly arbitrary and just mutually agreed upon rules. But if you're going to play the game of chess or you're going to run a race course, you've got to follow the rules and restrictions to get to the end point, right? Is that kind of what you mean by social contract?
Correct. Yeah, we've all kind of like agreed to this set of rules in participating in the sport, and then you have to comply by them. And it's funny because I mean there have been a lot of conversations in the running world of late, just about what exactly the rules are. There have been a lot of changes in shoe technology,
Mm-hmm.
and the rules are shifting about what is allowed at any given point. And so it seems like there's some catching up to do where some people might not even know what the norms are. Like, what have I agreed to? This person has much better shoes than I do. Are they allowed? And so we're all getting on the same playing field again. But yeah, it's like the community holds the rules. If you violate the rules, well, that's a problem in terms of your own character.
Yeah, I remember reading, this was a few years ago, that a particular type of swimsuit has been banned for in swimming competitions because I don't understand the science, or I haven't delved into it nearly enough. But like the materials and the shape of it gave whoever wore this particular type of swimsuit a measurable and significant advantage. So that was banned, and I guess technology has gotten to the point where that's now impacting running, and it's still in the process of figuring out what the limits are of the technological advantages that you can use in terms of shoe, and I don't know, maybe even shorts, and like the clothing that you wear.
Yeah, right. So in swimming, they said, no, you can't wear the suits. And in running, they were like, okay, you can wear the shoes. And so now we're rewriting the record books, and different companies are trying to catch up to be on that level. Baseball went through the same thing, right? With the kinds of bats allowed. Tennis went through the same thing with their rackets. So every sport has these kind of reckoning points where technology uh, interrupts the norms, and you have to decide again what the community is going to permit.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the balance that people need to strike between accomplishment, like being the best runner that you possibly can, or the best, really anything, but running in this case, and the many other things that make up for a full life, right? If you like you might have a career, and you might want to be really good at your job. Maybe you want a promotion, and promotion, or you have a family, you have a spouse, and possibly kids. You've got a circle of friends, you have parents, siblings, and a close circle, and so you only have a finite amount of time, and you may have multiple interests, and so you can't excel at everything, because to excel you really need to devote a lot of time to one thing in order to be among the best at it. And so you can't also devote a lot of time to five other things. You run out of time. So how do you balance wanting to be excellent at something with the very legitimate other demands on your time, maybe demands, but other areas in which you might be able to invest your time, including rest and relaxation, like watching a movie, or reading a book simply for pleasure, or just taking some time to do nothing, and lay fallow for yourself to regenerate time and energy. How do you strike that kind of balance, and how do you know that you're getting it at least approximately correct?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there are ways that you would ask this question kind of. So different people would answer this question in different ways, right? So what is running in your life, for example? Is it your job? Are you an Olympic level runner, or is it a hobby, right? And so you have to figure out kind of like your order of loves, right? So what are your commitments, and what is the proper place that they have in your life, right? Because that's going to look different to different people. Some people, right? So say it's an Olympic year, and you are training as hard as you can, and you know it's just going to be a short season of really high intensity, going all in, kind of like deep and narrow way of living. Well, the idea is that's not going to broadly characterize your whole life. It's just a season of going all in and kind of seeing what you're capable of, that sort of thing. But then you have to like subsequently pull back and see how it fits in the broad sphere of your life. So the word balance is one that, like, I don't know if it's because it's not as though you are trying to hold all things equal, right? Like hold them all, like weighing them on a scale, like this much sport and this much job and this much family or something like that. Like it's not a level thing. It's just sort of figuring out which you're answerable to and which has highest answerability. Um, and I think if you can't figure out which is the most important thing, then you'll end up deferring to whichever one has motivation or whichever is the loudest, right? So, say you have a really aggressive boss who wants your time and will insert themselves and make sure that you are like they are your priority. maybe that's not, your order of loves. Or with sport has this tendency of, say things are going really well and you have momentum in your training, and that can sort of like turn your attention, right? And so constantly asking the question of, is this becoming too big? Is this like proper in the scope of my life, right? Like that's going to be a different question for the person who is, say, single and an Olympian in an Olympic year, all in on their sport, versus the person who is trying to navigate a career that is also appalling for them, or family things, or they have a friend in need, who's, more time intensive at the moment or something like that. So it's constantly evolving. And I think it's like negotiating which you have to pay attention to at any given time.
So, I mean, this is something that you've had to do a fair amount. Like I've read your book, and like you've been a runner since grade school. You told a very amusing story of, I think you were in grade 1 or grade 2, and there was a guy in your class, and you would always be racing, and you're a quite accomplished ultra marathoner, but you know. You've grown. You got a PhD, so that's often all consuming for many of the PhD people I know that have got a PhD. You've become a professor, which is also a non-trivial investment of time and effort to excel in your area of scholarship. You're now a mother. And as a parent myself, I know how all consuming that can be. Can you give some personal insights into your journey from being a child who was interested in running into a teenager and a woman in her 20s, and then becoming a professional and becoming a wife and then becoming a mother? And you've like running has been a part of all of that, but your perspective must have changed over the years as you you've gone through different stages of life.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's something that, again, like the word negotiation is what I think in terms of like, it's something that has shifted over time. And, a kid enters the picture and you're asking the question of, well, am I running too much? Or am I doing this other thing too much? Like, there's constantly like answering to it, in different seasons of life. Um, I would say like probably the hardest thing through making transitions with respect to being a runner, um, going through different life changes and having running take different forms, is like running is very habitual. And so, you know, this past year, it's like it was the first year that I wasn't running professionally anymore. And I was still running like 90 something miles a week. And it was just because, like, oh, well, that's just what I always have done. But, it's no longer a job, and I'm no longer like competing all the time, and so then you have to ask yourself, well, should I make this smaller? But there's like a sense of identity, and this is sort of just what I do on a daily basis. And so, kind of like taking stock of, what role does this have in my life? Is it too big? Should I make it smaller? How does that impact me? Right? Because I still love running. It's just not a job anymore. And so I'd say I'm still working through that. And I'm sure, like, as I get older, maybe, your body can handle different loads and things like that. So I don't know. Honestly, I don't remember life before running. I think it's like a very big part of my vocation, and also how I just like walk the earth. Like it's a really
Mm-hmm.
natural movement for me, and it's really enjoyable. It's something I love to do. But also I have so many responsibilities and other things that I love, and as the other things that I love get bigger, and take up more space in my room, in my life, it's like the way that I the way that I liken it is, it's like in a living room, the my substantial obligations, like parenting and job and being a community member, those that's the couches, and running is just the space between the couches now, right? So like I call it prepositional running. Like I do it before things, between things, after things, but it can no longer be the central thing in my life anymore. So I like that image because it's like, it's not as though running is my substantial commitment. It's not a couch anymore. I'm just going to fit it in around things, still getting it in because I love it. If that makes
Yeah.
sense.
It actually does. Two years ago, I ran my second marathon, and I mean,
Nice.
my accomplishments are nothing compared to what you've done. But I before I agreed to do that, I had spoke to my family, and the way I thought of it and the way I described it is that it's not just a personal investment of time; it's a familial one because I need to spend a tremendous amount of time not in the house but out running and training. And so there was a period of about 6 months where there were only four things in my life. There was my family, there was training, there was my job, and there was this podcast. And I saw basically no friends. I did nothing that wasn't directly related to one of those four things. And I mean, I was quite successful in that. I managed to juggle those four things. I had nothing else. I was very pleased with my performance in the marathon. I ran a half marathon not long thereafter and achieved a time goal that I had set more than 2 decades before. It was incredible. But then I like basically lay down on the couch and didn't get up for 6 months. Because I mean, there was like my whole community outside of my immediate family I hadn't seen in half a year. I just because there was no time for that. So that the ebb and flow and the negotiation and uh, the prepositional running, I like the sounds of that. That imagery because yeah, you do it before or between all of the other things. Um, so yes, thank you
And
for that. Mhm.
it's funny that you say four things. I mean, that's a lot, still getting four things. Like when I started collegiate running, I remember our coach said, she said, schoolwork, running, friends, you can only choose two. And we had to decide, like, oh, is running one of our things, right?
Yeah,
So I think, yeah, we're constantly navigating the order these things go in.
yeah, and I mean, it does take a lot of discipline, right? Like I had to structure things. I'm sure you did too, and there wasn't really much spare time. Uh, I I want to talk about like being competitive because I mean I never have been and I never will be competitive in the sense that I'm going to win even in my age bracket. Like I'm not a superb athlete. I'm very impressed given how I spent the first several decades of my life with the accomplishments I've made in the second half of my life. But I'm not going to be somebody who's going to be the best in the world, the best in the country, the best in my city. But I mean, you write that it's possible to be very competitive with yourself, and that was another thing that you wrote that really resonated with me because that is how I feel. Like the fact that there's faster people out there. Well, that's fine. That's always has been true, and as far as I'm concerned, it always will be. I there's no point in me wanting to be the fastest runner because it's never going to happen. But I I might be able to. I've run maybe 12 or 15 half marathons. I've run two marathons, and I'm like, I might be able to beat my my previous marathon time. Like the only real competitor is against me. So can you talk about being competitive, about the different perspectives of what competition means, and how that relates to a broader perspective in life?
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, really, that's what any of us are doing, kind of refining ourselves with respect to our personal history, right? And that's all you can do, right? Like if you're improving with respect to yourself, you are being refined by the process. Running hard feels bad if you're running hard and that means 5 minute pace, or if that means 9 minute pace, right? Like you are still being edified by that effort, wherever that pace is. Like that doesn't really matter. Competition just means striving together. And what's interesting, I think, is like when people often ask me if I'm competitive, what they mean is like, am I undone by loss? Like, do I have to win? Is my day over if I don't win? Right? Like those kinds of things. And that's not strictly speaking what striving together is, right? Like striving together is just kind of a neutral explanation of what's happening, right? We're both pushing maybe side by side or whatever. We are both kind of moving in the same direction, being edified by the process. What they're describing, that being undone by loss, is actually envy. So envy is so wedded to competition in our cultural imagination that we often
Mhm.
define competition as such, right? And that is such a loss. Like I hear some of my younger athletes will say that line like, um, comparison is the thief of joy. It's like, is comparison the thief of joy? Comparison just means like seeing someone else. Why is that stealing your joy? And it's because they're doing it from a place of envy, right? Like you can emulate someone, right? See the good in them, desire that good, and have like an uncomfortable, I want to be like that sort of situation, right? That's emulation, and that's pro-social. That's good. There's also admiration, right? Like you
Mhm.
can appreciably perceive their excellence. You can experience gratitude for their excellence, right? Because we do know that competing, like striving in the context of other people, is something that calls us to a higher standard, right? It shows us what we're capable of. There are these studies of like someone biking all out, or what they perceive to be their all out, by themselves for an hour versus doing it next to somebody else. And the all out is so much greater when they are next to someone else, right?
I
Because
have
we're held to a higher
absolutely noticed
standard.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've
Um,
absolutely noticed that.
yeah. So as far as like excellence is concerned, or getting the most out of ourselves, we are the greatest gift to one another. So it's unfortunate that we just like think of it in these negative terms, this kind of like undoing. Um, and envy is a kind of theft, I think, because it's, you just, either you win or you explain away their victory. Like you don't celebrate their victory, and that's taking something from that person who's won, right? Celebrating them is like a really pro-social, kind thing to do. Upholds the standards of the competition.
Yeah. So that's related to something else that you wrote. Uh, there is a difference between feeling bad and feeling bad for myself. And I'm the only one who gets to decide how I respond. And in that context, you were talking about a hard workout, but I mean that can apply to a number of other things. So, can you take a moment and explain to me what is the difference between feeling bad and feeling bad for myself?
Yeah. I mean, feeling bad is something that just accompanies any kind of effort, right? Like, it's difficult. It's really hard to remain in place when you are physically uncomfortable, and everybody feels that. Feeling bad is not something that's going to destroy your races. What's going to destroy your races is feeling bad for yourself, by which I mean a kind of like despair, right? So you're like, I can't do this. I can't go on. Like it's worse for me than for anybody else. Like you forget to look at other people's faces and see that they are also struggling too. Everybody is feeling bad. But if you're feeling bad for yourself, it's really hard to come back from something like that. And so I do, like in the middle of races, I like to remind myself, like, look around at other people, in the longer races where you talk a bit more, right? Like in 100 mile, like ask them how they're doing, right? You will find that you are not alone in your suffering. And it has a kind of emboldening effect on you when you realize that, oh, we feel bad, but we feel bad together. But once you start to despair, that's a problem. So I talk about two virtues that are good in terms of like buoying. Never use that as a verb. That are kind of like a buoy for you. And one is humor, right? Like this kind of recognition of the comically incongruous in your situation, right? Like I put myself in this really weird place. Like I voluntarily entered into this weird race, and now I feel bad, right? Like having a little lightness to you about
Hmm.
that. There's that, and there's also joy, right? Like joy is having this kind of internal fixity on your purpose, so that you can't be smushed down, right? Like if you think about a buoy on in the water, right? You push it down and it pops back up, having that kind of levity, so you don't despair, so you don't just feel bad for yourself, is really valuable in endurance sport.
Yeah, that reminds me of a core Stoic principle of things are going to happen, but how you react to them. You can't always control. Sorry, things are going to happen. You can't always control what happens or what happens to you or what other people do, but you can control your reaction to it to some extent. And that I'll be actually speaking about Stoicism in my next episode. So it's interesting to see how these are um, how these are connected. But I wanted to ask how, like, when you're in a race and you are feeling bad, and you are pushing yourself. Uh, at the start of our conversation, you said that one of the bad things or one of the vices that people have is pushing yourself for short term accomplishment, and but you're at the cost of injury, so of long term. How can you, like, when you're in the race and you're feeling terrible and your legs hurt and your lungs are on fire and you're like, I don't know if I can do this, and everyone else has got the same expression, how do you find the balance between, no, I can do this and I am going to persevere and I'm going to keep doing this without crossing a breaking point of something where a tendon snaps or your knees give out, or some people have had heart attacks in races, or you completely bonk and you don't have enough oxygen, and you come down, like, where you need to push yourself close to your limit, whatever your limit happens to be. But how do you know where that actually is without crossing it and doing possibly permanent injury to yourself?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, two things I'll say. First of all, if I feel bad in a race, I do one of two things. First, I delay decisions. Like if I'm like, I need to quit now, well, I'm going to make myself wait a minute, right? Because making impulsive decisions is not a good idea. Two, I eat something. Um, Cures any number of ills. Most of the time when you feel bad, it's actually that you're hungry. But in terms of like, am I crossing a line in terms of am I doing damage to myself? I think I would say in broad strokes, that's something that you can determine through greater experience in the sport. I coached youth athletics for a while, and I would have these like middle schoolers or early high schoolers, and they didn't know like where the lines were, and so I would have to get to know them pretty well. Like there would be, I'm thinking of one girl, if she told me, oh, something's a little bit sore, it would mean her leg was already broken, right? Versus like
Yeah.
another, like some of the others, they'll complain all day long, and it's just like the discomfort of running, and that they have a hard time telling the difference. And so I
Right.
think to some extent, like you have experience with these things, and as you run, you can tell like, oh, I think actually there's something seriously wrong with my body, and this is not something that is just standard discomfort. And I say that like I think that's a general rule, but I do think sometimes we get it wrong, especially if incentives or motivations are askew. Like I remember this past summer in the Olympic Games, one of the women running for Great Britain had like her femur snapped halfway through the Olympic marathon. And you would think, well, if you're at the Olympic level, like you should know where those lines are. But certainly the incentives in that case would be to run if there was any reasonable doubt about the quality
Right.
of your constitution or something like that. So I honestly, I think it's a difficult question. It's one that gets easier, right? You acquire practical wisdom through experience. And in some cases, you're probably going to get it wrong. Hopefully, the thing that you get wrong is not a grave injury.
Okay. Let's take a step back and a broader perspective here, I think that like virtue ethics and living a good life are not new concepts for a majority of the listeners of Podcast for Inquiry. But I think the concept of running is foreign to most of them. Like, you could spend a pleasant afternoon reading a book or listening to a podcast or doing pretty much anything and have fun, or you can spend half an hour to 6 hours or more going out and punishing your body so that you are going to be sore and depleted and barely be able to move tomorrow, where you're going to do it again. So just from a very broad perspective, my audience tends to be a very analytical and rational group of people. Why? Why, Sabrina, would anybody in their right mind take up running at all?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I think some of it is like curiosity, right? You know, when you're a child, if you talk to a child and you say, "How far can you run?" they would say, like, you know, I could just run forever, right? And then you get older and you can test that hypothesis and see like how far you can actually run. But I don't know. Like, honestly, my conception when you're describing it as like an uncomfortable thing that makes you sore and things like that, like most of my experience of running is very like pleasant. It's like you find the comfort in the discomfort and you just stay there, right? Like I'm not pushing to the extent where I'm feeling damaged or deflated when I return. Most of your training, they say 80% of your training should be relatively easy, and then 20% should be that kind of refining, pushing efforts, things like that. And so I think honestly, like a lot of people, their imagination for what runners are doing is a lot more miserable than what it feels like to me on a regular basis. To me, it just feels like kind of like recess, going outside, getting fresh air, having some space from my books, so I can think things through with like put a little bit of distance. When I go for a run and then I come back and write, it feels like my brain feels like it's gotten a full night of sleep. Like it's a kind
Yeah.
of recovery thing for me, and that's been really valuable. I also think if you've ever, so okay, I just had my third child, and so I'm
Congratulations.
three, thanks. I'm 3 months postpartum, and so the comeback to running is still fresh on my mind. And anytime I've returned to running, I remember why people think running is hard. And it's because those early weeks are just really uncomfortable. But if you get past those first 3 or 4 weeks, right, and you have this routine and your body becomes accustomed to it, you find this level of pleasure in the activity that I think in the arduous habit forming stages in the beginning, you don't get yet.
Yeah, so I ran my first marathon about 13 years ago. I'm agreeing with you here. And about, I don't know, a little under a year later, I broke my ankle. I was playing
Oh,
soccer in a dad's league. Like it was just a freak accident. It happens, right? It was not, nobody was pushing too hard. It was just, I went up for a header and landed wrong. And I went to physical therapy, and I did all of the exercises. And I was very fortunate in that the nature of the break, although it required surgery and a long healing process, I did fully recover. And so I went out for my first run. It was like a year, like 14 months later, but I had the memory of how fast I'm supposed to go and how long I'm able to go to do it. But I had been largely of necessity sedentary for a year, and I got about 3.5 kilometers in and I was throwing up on the sidewalk. It was awful because I pushed myself too hard and I had to build from a much lower base up to a higher, that higher level, because I had to earn it back. My body was no longer at the level that I was at. And you write in the book a piece of advice that I thought was really insightful, and that said, embrace the gawky phase. And and what you were talking about, that is, you're not going to be elegant and fantastic at something the first time you try that. And that's certainly been true in my life. Like the first time I've tried just about anything, I've sucked. And like in some cases I've sucked. Like I've been awful. And like I don't know how I don't know how general this expectation is, but I've noticed that with my kids, they seem to think that they should be awesome at something the first time they try it. And if they try it and they're mid, they're like, that's not for me. It's like, no, like you've got something worth pursuing. It's okay if you're terrible. It's not because you're terrible. Just because you suck at this, it's not that you suck. It's that you suck at this because you haven't done it before. And if you stick with it, you're going to do it again, and you're going to suck a little less. And then you'll be a little bit better. And then you'll get to the point where you're mid. And then but just like, I think of it as like growing. Like you never notice your kids growing day to day, right? Like they go to bed at night, you see them in the morning, they haven't grown. You see them all day, they haven't grown. They go to bed, you wake up the next morning, they haven't grown. But then you think back to how they were 6 months ago. It's like, holy cow, they're a completely different person. And I think like the accumulation of skill level in running and just about anything else is a lot like that. You just don't notice it one time to the next. Can you tell me a little bit about what it means to embrace the gawky phase and how you get people to do that? Because that's something I didn't think of it in those terms until I read it in your book. I wish I had. But it's not something I've been very successful, at least with my children, to get them to embrace the gawky phase. You've been a coach. You've now got 3 children. How have you gotten people? Because I don't think it's a natural tendency. How have you gotten people to embrace the gawky phase when they're trying something new, and so they're not very good at it yet, even if they have tremendous potential?
Yeah, I mean, keeping it fun is a big thing, right? So I think the greatest enemy of embracing the gawky phase is like if you are evaluating each and every run individually, right?
Right.
Like because you're not going to see the progress, you're just going to see all the mess, like all of the things that are not great yet. And then so having some kind of like having built in retrospective moments throughout the season where you see where you've come from rather than just like every single day over scrutinizing whatever you've done. Like you just can't take it that seriously. You have to embrace kind of the process and find delight in the day to day so that you can stay engaged in the process and proceed. So, right. I think that's true in running, right? Like you can see, I mean, running longs are great for this, right? You look at day one and then you look at the end of the season and you see that kind of progression and then put more hope in the process, and then it's easier to take delight in it. I also think there's something to be said for this being the case morally speaking, right? So say you have some sort of deficit, like you're impatient or something. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how do you become more patient? You act patiently, right? And in the same way that like you learn to be a runner, you learn to play a musical instrument, and at first it's like the instrument, it's like you're terrible to listen to, right?
Yeah.
And you don't see anything good about it, right? Like over time, you'll get better, right? Having that same kind of long view with respect to your virtues, right? So I am still messing up on a daily basis with trying to be more patient, trying to wait well, trying to
Mm-hmm.
abide difficulty with more poise, right? Like these kinds of
Patience. Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. How long does that take?
yeah, how long will it take for me
Come
to
on.
develop
I
patience?
want to be patient already.
Yeah, yeah. I think like that same sort of thing where you are not over evaluating, right? Just like practicing, putting in the work to become better in that respect, and then look back every now and then. But if you are examining every day and like being hyper inspective or something like that, there's no pleasure in the process of becoming anything. It's just going to be tedious and deflating, and you won't want to continue.
All right. I've just got a few more questions, and I think I want to focus more on on the ethics and the virtues rather than running, but we can, of course, can tie them in. You wrote that there are ideas of being or behaviors of being devoted and committed and conscientious, but these same behaviors can be described by others using different words, like being obsessed or single-minded and stubborn. And so the question I have is there a difference in the behaviors? Like, is there actually a difference between being devoted to somebody or to a goal and being obsessed with it? Or is it just the perspective one takes in viewing them, and whether you want a charitable interpretation or to be uncharitable when describing a particular act or tendency?
Yeah, so the reason I wrote that was that in participating on some of the national teams that I've been a part of, I just noticed that sometimes the families of the runners would use different words to describe the athletes than the
Mm-hmm.
press would, right? So yeah, they'd be called conscientious or devoted, from like within the sport, and from without, you have a sense that, this person is obsessed and neurotic or something like that. And how do you square those two things? So sometimes I do think there's a certain level of, lack of charity. Like, say you're not in the sport, why would you? I mean, it's going to seem crazy that this person needs to run every day or something like that. And so sometimes I do think there's a certain amount of misunderstanding. However, running tends to be really presentist, right? You're in the here now.
Mm-hmm.
It tends to be, like the only good that they are fixed on is the performance, right? And there are many goods in a rich life. And if you're narrowly fixated on just the ability to achieve one end, you're going to miss a lot of things. And so I always tell young runners, like, you should have role models within the sport, right? You should have a vision of what it looks like to be excellent from within the sport. But you should also have mentors in your life who are outside of the sport speaking into your life, so that you can kind of develop a sort of perspective on what, like where the sport fits in the broad scheme of things. Because it
Lead a
is just
full
like,
life of which running is a perhaps very significant part, but running isn't
yeah,
your life, right? It's a part of a fuller or part of your complete life.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the worry that I have is, so sometimes I talk to runners who are now older, and they just like realize that they trashed their bodies for like a very short term period of success. And they wish that someone had, given them like greater perspective on the grand scheme of things and other things of value, and that they could have invested their time and energy and attention into other things. And so having that kind of broader perspective, to balance your interest in running, I think is something that would benefit a lot of us.
Yeah, I do consider myself. I'm in my early 50s, and I consider myself fortunate that being a geek for the first 3 decades of my life, that my body was intact, that I didn't blow out my knees as a teenager or in my 20s. I wanted to ask you. You write that there is a difference between benign envy and malicious envy, and we've spoken about envy before. But when we've talked about it so far today, it's just been like one of the vices, a negative trait. But we haven't really talked about benign envy. So, can you talk about what benign envy is and how it's different than malicious envy?
Yeah, so benign envy is, I actually dislike this term. That's what the social sciences use. So I have to play by their vocabulary. But by benign envy, they just mean emulation. And so benign envy, right, not a vice. Malicious envy is a vice. And they're distinguished in terms of like, so if you have malicious envy, which is the vice of envy, this kind of unhappy self-assertion, where you're trying to correct a gap between yourself and some excellent other, you will do that by any means possible. And so you are equally happy if you're able to exceed them or if you're able to take away their success, right? Like you would be appeased by them ceasing to have that good thing. And what we see in terms of the action potential or the motivation of malicious envy is that in most cases, the actions it motivates are to tear down the other person, right? And so maybe that is like, removing course marking so they lose their way, or maybe it is talking down about them, or maybe it is explaining away their success. Whatever it is, it's a taking from them.
Mm-hmm.
Versus benign envy, this kind of emulation, is a leveling up emotion. And so you rise to the level of the
Wow.
excellent person. So you're
So
not
yeah,
tearing down, right? In
right.
both
It's
cases, there's,
improving yourself rather
right.
than denigrating or demoting the other person's accomplishments or
Yeah,
abilities.
right. And benign envy is also, it's an interesting emotion because you feel two things, right? Like a lot of emotions you feel like, either down or up, right? In this case, you feel both down and up. You see something beautiful in the other person, you want it yourself, and also you feel sad that you don't have it. So it's called a mixed balanced emotion. So it's more complex, but it is pro-social, right? Like, because you're calling yourself up to a higher standard instead of pulling the other person down, versus like the vice of envy, which is, yeah, you're just pulling them down and you feel bad for yourself and it's not productive in any way. So that's the
Right.
difference.
All right. This is my last question for you. I'd like you to comment on something else that you wrote that also quite resonated with me. You wrote that Cicero notes that this is a general human vulnerability, that you would rather people rather you wish to be endowed with virtue rather than to seem so. Um, or sorry, what it means, people would rather be seen to have
Yeah.
to be virtuous than to actually be virtuous. Sorry, I got confused, got that backwards the first time, and I thought, oh yes, like I read that and I had to pause for a moment. It's like that is the source of so much strife in the world, and I thought
Yeah.
maybe you could comment on that in general and maybe how that applies to runners. But you thought that was important enough to include in the book. I that just leapt off the page for me, so I want to give you the chance to comment on that a little bit further.
Yeah, I think you're right. So it seems that in most cases, people like they put on morality as a sort of social performance, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
want a good reputation instead of actually doing the arduous work of like changing on the inside. Sometimes it's called, so in the social sciences, they'll call it veneer theory. Like your morality is just this thin covering or veneer, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
skin of an orange, and on the inside you're a savage. And so you're just like acting as though you're a nice person, but in reality you're not. And so sometimes when I talk to people about virtue and vice, like, or when I say things like, hey, maybe like we could admire our competition or feel gratitude, like they think it's some kind of pretense that you're pretending to be something, but in reality, like that's not how you feel. And when we're talking about substantial character change, right? Like having a good character, it's not just what people see. It is in fact who you are when people aren't looking. It is true to your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings. You're acting in terms of the good. And so I don't want people to think like when we're doing these conversations about morality and sport, it's not like we're playing a role and pretending we're good and happy people. No, we're reckoning with the messiness of being human and saying like, I mean, like sometimes I'm envious toward my competition. Like, why is that a problem? Like, is it making me better? Is it defiling our community? Am I like ceasing to celebrate other people because I have this character deficiency? And then just like playing nice in front of them? Well, that's not the goal here. And so the goal is character change. And we know that happens slowly and it happens intentionally. Like, you're not going to develop a good character by accident. It is something that kind of like we were talking about in terms of the slow process of becoming a runner. even though like day to day it seems like no progress is happening. The same thing is true with your character. You just have to like engage in that process. Also surround yourself by people you want to be like, right? Like have people who provide a vision of what it looks like to occupy the sport in ways of high integrity and so forth. But yeah, we're not trying to have like orange skin morality where it's like on the inside we are a mess, and we're trying to like substantially change our character on the inside.
All right. Sabrina Little, thank you so much, author of The Examined Run. This has been a wonderful conversation. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
No, I just want to thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really fun.
All right. This has been wonderful. Thanks again, and good luck in the next phase of your non-professional running life.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please consider giving us a 5-star review and showing your support at patreon.com/podcastforinquiry. Email us podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. Help us support rational discourse and evidence-based decision-making by becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. CFIC is on the web, on Facebook, and you can follow us on Blue Sky at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Zach Dumont and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblatt. See you next time.